RFK Jr. outlining his plan to phase out artificial dyes from the U.S. food supply. Don't worry, Jesse. Your hair dye's safe. For now. Roll it, Roland.
We have them on the run now, and we are going to win this battle. And 4 years from now, we're going to have most of these products off the market, or you will know about them when you go in the grocery store.
So, Dana, I don't know how you feel about artificial dyes. I mean, don't you feel like this is a disadvantage for ugly food?
Yeah,
how will ugly?
Sure.
I mean, it's like telling a 7 or a 6 that she can't wear makeup.
No, and then you realize that she's a 1.
Yes.
It's going to be a long night. I understand the idea. I understand that Europe has done a lot of this. Food in Europe is pretty good. I haven't noticed a problem. Like, I got to go to Spain, it was fine. But I do wonder about European-style regulations sometimes, and if it's self-inflicted economic harm. And that I also don't know why you have to go to war with companies unless, is there a way to, like, do we have to be at war with everybody? Can we just, like, maybe cooperate and see if there's a way to get things better? But I know that this is very popular with some people.
Jesse, RFK Jr. believes that these dyes have contributed to behavioral problems. If that were the case, wouldn't we be all freaked up like freaks right now? Because, like, I ate so much breakfast cereal. It was coming out of my ears.
Right, but you stopped eating the breakfast cereal.
No.
You still eat Trix?
Oh, I'll eat it at midnight.
You really? Okay. Well, you do other things, but other people don't. And they eat like 17 bowls of it. And then they eat Flaming Hot Cheetos. And then they eat Baja California Mountain Dew. And so his point is this. This is not nanny state. This is just telling people what this stuff is. And they have agreed without being sued to remove it. Now, Trix tried this. And they used radishes, purple carrots, and turmeric. Is that how you say it?
Yes, it's great.
And no one bought Trix because all the colors were dull. So they went back to the food dyes. So hopefully this works out because it does cause ADHD and it lowers your testosterone if you eat too much of this stuff. Is it true? I read it on the internet, Dana.
Okay.
Has to be true.
Got it.
Judge, would you ever eat ugly food?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been accused of making it sometimes, too. Look, here's the thing about RFK. This guy fought his family, his party. He's in there doing what he thinks and what I believe is it's long past time for this country to do. Where the FDA and the CDC, nobody really gave a damn. You've got Japan, Europe, you've got other countries who banned all of these color dyes. And in the United States, we're seeing all kinds of suffering as a result of all of these poisons and carcinogens. And you, as he said, you want petroleum in your cereal? Go ahead, pour it at home yourself. But don't put it in my cereal. I give him incredible credit. And the president, too.
I'm
for
all
giving
for
him
it.
the ability
Get the stuff
to
out
do
of the
it.
food.
All right. One more thing's up next. Sorry, kid.
Clean eating is on the menu today. At 4 p.m. Eastern, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is expected to announce a plan to phase out artificial petroleum-based food dyes. These dyes are commonly used in bright-colored cereals, drinks, and candies. So I'm thinking it's free choice, though, right, still? That makes you sound so weak. But I might have to have some Fruit Loops. Maybe it's just me.
I ate some of this stuff. You're reading that they found it had carcinogens about 30 years ago, and they just kept pumping it and kept pumping it. Maybe we don't want to know the real color of Fruit Loops. I don't know. But it's really about time. You know, I'm glad we're getting to the Make America Healthy Again phase of this administration. I've been waiting for this.
Well, you know, the book came out in 2020.
Your book did come out in 2020. And you know what, Dr. Sapphire? You could do a re-release with like a little biographical update.
Yeah, no, listen, I applaud RFK Jr. and his entire team, what they're doing, really tackling the chronic illness epidemic here in the country, removing some of the harmful chemicals that are very obvious in our foods and our cosmetics. I mean, the fact that some of these chemicals were removed from our cosmetics decades ago because that these chemicals are linked to being carcinogens. Maybe we don't have robust studies showing direct cause and effect, but we can kind of deduce something. If you give someone chronic use of this over time, it's likely going to do something to their bodies. And the fact that Europe and other places in the world don't allow this kind of makes us look at our own, what we are putting into our bodies, what's going on here, which is probably why we're so unhealthy. I love the idea of what they're doing, removing some of the food dyes. Anybody who knows me, who listens to me, knows that I love natural herbs. And they're saying, instead of these dyes, we're going to start using like turmeric, beetroot powder, spirulina, all of these natural ways to add coloring because, you know, we love colored foods,
So
apparently.
are they going to taste similarly?
So removing the dye itself is not going to alter the taste, and in fact, it might taste better with some of these more natural ways. When they start removing a lot of the sugars and the ultra-processed stuff, things may not taste the way we're used to, but that's because we've now created this environment where we're used to things tasting super sweet in a certain way, but that is just fueling our illness crisis.
And salty, I mean, and that's driving those, really, we're at pandemic
Let's get back to our meat, potatoes, vegetables, fruits, and not all the additives.
Yep, all right.
I was just going to say, can you read the ingredients on the label? If you can't pronounce the ingredients,
Oh, my goodness.
you know it's something that you should not be having. I mean, listen, there's this whole trend with organics and, you know, having organic vegetables and fruit. It's a little bit more expensive. I, you know, don't always adhere to that. I take everything home and scrub until it's all good. Dr. Nicole, don't judge me.
No judgment.
You know, not every day can you have organic, you know, food. It's expensive.
And it's expensive. It's really expensive. And it goes bad really quickly.
But I'm just going to tell you, you know, children who have behavioral problems, knowing that, you know, giving them the cereal to start their day off and then misbehave in class and then be stigmatized for the rest of their life, because let's face it, the way that you are treated in grammar school and high school sticks with you for the rest of your life. So knowing what we know now, maybe we can give our kids a leg up on education.
You are the deep end of the ocean.
That was really deep.
Yeah,
that was good. That was good.
beautiful.
I also just think this is so interesting in a political sense. There were decades where the Republican Party was completely beholden to corporate interests. And as those corporations became more and more left-wing and are now completely aligned with the Democrat Party, and then in replacing them in the Republican Party is this Make America Healthy Again movement, which was like a surprising new addition to the coalition. And they are very responsible for the November election, and they're finally getting some of what they demanded.
Rosie O'Donnell's living through the golden age as a political refugee, seeking sanctuary in Ireland. Does she have any regrets?
I have no regrets. Not a day has gone by that I thought it was the wrong decision. I was welcomed with open arms. I knew after reading Project 2025 that if Trump got in, it was time for me and my non-binary child to leave the country. I made the decision within my family and my therapist, and should he win, and then when he did, we made the plan into action, and we were gone before he was inaugurated.
Although Rosie's been hiding from her homeland since Trump took office, she still wants to tear apart his cabinet from abroad, starting with Bobby.
I think it's disgraceful, and I think he is wholly unqualified to be the head of Health and Human Services. I think most of the cabinet picks that Donald Trump has made are part of his vision of a reality show government and not the most qualified people available, especially Robert Kennedy. And to think that his family is the one that created the Special Olympics and he would go on with such disgraceful, dehumanizing remarks is absolutely deplorable. And I feel he should resign or be released from his position.
Funny, Rosie never talked about health until Trump and Kennedy got in power. And she's been on TV for decades. America leads the world in chronic diseases and obesity, and studies are pointing the finger at processed foods. So today, RFK and his team at HHS took their boldest step yet to confront America's chronic health crisis. Watch.
Today, the FDA is taking action to remove petroleum-based food dyes from the U.S. food supply and from medications. For the last 50 years, American children have increasingly been living in a toxic soup of synthetic chemicals.
Food dye is just a no-brainer. Nobody wants to eat petroleum. Everybody knows there's enough science out there that we know it's terrible for you. That causes health problems, but also behavioral problems. A healthy person has 1,000 dreams. The sick person only has one. And right now, there's 60% of the people in this country who have only one dream, that they can make it through a day without pain, with energy, without having to take medications. And we are going to change that for our country.
HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is here. All right, Secretary, I don't know if you can see, but I have a little snack food aisle set up next to me here on set. We have Flamin' Hot Cheetos. We have Skittles. We have Trix, Fruit Loops, the whole thing. Now, Gutfeld made a point on the 5 today. He said, when I was growing up, I ate Fruit Loops for breakfast every day, and I turned out just fine. Now, I would argue he turned out like a maniac. He's hyperactive and deranged, but does he have a point? What are these food dyes actually doing to kids especially?
Yeah, well, if you look at the ingredients for Fruit Loops 20 years ago, it was very, very different than it is today. And today we use chemicals in Fruit Loops that are banned in virtually every country in the world. So if you buy Fruit Loops today in Canada, it is made with vegetable dyes. If you buy it here in the United States, it's made with petroleum synthetics. And as I said in that clip, nobody wants to eat petroleum. So when we went to meet with the food companies, I said to my staff, you know, if they want to eat petroleum, they should put it in their food themselves at home. They shouldn't be feeding it to Americans who, without their knowledge, without their consent. And today we announced that we're going to get it out of the food. So there are 9 dyes, Jesse. 2 of them we're going to ban immediately, orange bee and red dye 2. We're going to accelerate the removal of red dye 3, so we're going to bring it down to under a year. And the other 6 dyes, within 18 months, we hope to get them out of all the food. And that's just the beginning. I mean, one of the problems is that the science about these additives has been systematically suppressed for 30 years because the industry has been running this agency. And we're getting rid of all of those conflicts. We've gotten rid of most of them. And we're going to do real science. And we're going to do science precisely on the issues that Americans care about, making sure their kids are getting food that isn't poison. The food our kids are eating today is not really food. It's food-like substances. And some of it was made in petroleum refineries. And we need to give our kids real food again. We've got the highest chronic disease burden of any country in the world. When my uncle was president, 3% of Americans had chronic disease. Today, it's 60%. 74% of our kids cannot qualify for military service. We have fertility rates that are just spiraling. A teenager today, an American teenager, has less testosterone than a 68-year-old man. Sperm counts are down 50%.
Wait, so
girls are
an
hitting
American
puberty 6 years
teenager
early.
has less testosterone than a 60-year-old man?
That's right, because the testosterone levels have dropped 50% from historic levels. And, you know, and that is a problem. And it's an existential problem. But that is only when we have obesity. That is off the charts.
Yeah.
Again, when my uncle was president, we had about 11% of kids had obesity. Today, 74% of Americans are obese or overweight. And, you know, in Japan, it's 3%. So, you know, and that's because they pay attention to what they're feeding kids in school.
Yeah, the Japanese are very skinny, except for the sumo wrestlers. Those people, not so skinny. Rosie O'Donnell, of all people, Mr. Secretary, and I don't want to be mean or personally attack her, but she says you're unqualified. You don't know the science, and you should be fired. What do you say to Rosie?
Well, you know, there was a wave of anger against me because I announced that we're going to find the cause of autism. This is something that President Trump told me on day one. I want to know what's causing it within a year. And I announced how we're going to do that. We are going to farm out grants to 15 groups, teams of the top scientists in the world. And we're going to look at all of the possible culprits, and we're going to do that within a year. We'll have answers within 6 months. We'll have definitive answers within a year, and we'll know. And then we'll be able to eliminate the exposures. And this kind of tsunami of anger against me for making that announcement was almost incomprehensible to me. I mean, why would people not want to know what the cause of autism is? We know it's an epidemic. The science is very clear. It was about 1 in 10,000 kids in 1970. And there's the biggest epidemiological study in history was done in 1970 in American history, 900,000 kids. And they found all the kids in Wisconsin were tested. there were 60 of them had autism. Today, it's 20,000 in that same number.
Wow.
We've gone from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 31, 1 in every 20 boys in this country. In California, it's 1 in 20 kids and 1 in 12 boys. So this is a crisis. This is 20 times worse than COVID-19 in terms of the economic impact, the social impact, the moral impact on our country's capacity to lead the world, to be an exemplary nation. All of that is challenged. To have the vigor and robust population that we need to become an industrial and economic power again.
You know,
we're destroying all of that.
Mr. Secretary,
and we need to find out what the answer is.
You just mentioned COVID-19. We're seeing reports that you're considering removing the COVID vaccine as a mandatory shot for children. And we're also seeing that Fauci doubled his fortune over the last couple of years, right after the pandemic. Are you going to look into how that happened?
Well, in terms of President Trump doesn't believe that anybody should get mandatory vaccines. There's a medical intervention. It has risks. People should make that choice for themselves. The COVID vaccine, the recommendation for children was always dubious. And it was dubious because kids had almost no risk for COVID-19. Certain kids that had very profound morbidities may have a slight risk. Most kids don't. So why are we giving this to tens of millions of kids when the vaccine itself does have profound risk? We've seen huge associations with myocarditis and pericarditis, with strokes, with other injuries, with neurological injuries. And this was clear even in the clinical data that came out of Pfizer. There were actually more deaths. There were about 23% more deaths in the vaccine group than the placebo group. So, we need to ask questions, and we need to consult with parents. We need to give people informed consent, and we shouldn't be making recommendations that are not good for the population.
All right. Well, I'll follow up on the Fauci question another time. Mr. Secretary, good to see you. And I'm not going to have any tricks right now. Maybe I'll just give it to Johnny. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jesse.
All right.
HHS Secretary RFK Jr. is about to make a big announcement and a big step towards making America healthy again, the project that he has been working on since taking office. It's a plan to get more of these synthetic dyes out of our food by the end of 2026. My next guest will be at that news conference. Vani Hari is a food activist and founder of Food Babe, which is hugely popular on all of our social media. Vani, great to have you with us. Thank you very much for joining me today, and thanks for the work that you're doing to get some of this stuff that isn't great for us out of our food. Tell me a little bit about, tell me what you can about what we expect at 4 o'clock.
Well, this is the culmination of all of our voices that we've been working on for over a decade. The fact that American companies are using ingredients that are more poisonous here in the United States and better in other countries, safer ingredients. And now President Trump, Secretary Kennedy, and the FDA Commissioner, Dr. Marty Makary, are putting a stake in the ground. They're saying you can no longer do this. And it is going to be one of the most impactful moments of our food system and our food industry here today when the FDA makes the announcement later on how he's planning to address the phasing out of artificial food dyes that are made from petroleum and coal tar that are linked to hyperactivity in children and neurological disorders and cancers and other things. And what he is going to recommend happen to address this issue for the first time in history.
So let's just put up the Fruit Loops, and you can see in these ingredients, in the U.S. they include red 40, yellow 5, blue 1, yellow 6, and then in the India version, they don't include any of those things. They use beetroot red, paprika extract in order to make the colors in the Fruit Loops. But I'm curious, obviously the reason that we have not seen any budge in all of this is that these food companies have very strong lobbyists who have pushed to maintain these standards in our foods. So how are you going to get them to stop? And won't they push back on this? How long do you think this is going to take? And are they going to go along?
they are going to have to go along because we have leadership like we've never had before. The fact that President Trump invited a Maha mom like myself is the first time in history. You know, I was a delegate for President Obama for 2 terms, and I was never invited to the White House to talk about these type of issues. And it's absolutely incredible, the leadership we're seeing. And the food companies see the writing on the wall. They know that Americans have learned the truth about these dyes, and they have to remove them. American companies can no longer get away with selling one set of ingredients here and another in other countries. It's unfair. We've seen the chronic disease rates skyrocket where we spend the most on healthcare, but we have the worst health outcomes. Now we're going to start to address those issues with meaningful reform at the FDA. Today is a day I can say the FDA is no longer asleep at the wheel, and it's absolutely incredible.
All right. Well, we look forward to hearing this announcement and watching this play out and seeing if you and the FDA can hold these feet to the fire with these companies, because they're going to have to really make a lot of changes in the way they do their production and business. So, Vani Hari, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great to see you today. Thanks for joining us.
Take care.
Big story today from the Trump team. They're going to ban these dyes, a lot of them too. What we found is that more than 1 in 10 are in food beverage products that contain at least one artificial dye. Going to give you some examples right now. Hidden ingredients, very interesting. Of the 30, who knew, right? Of the 31 different products of wasabi, 31% have yellow 5 and blue 1. Of the pickles that you have on the store shelves today, 29% have yellow 5. All this according to the Wall Street Journal. And then you got pre-made pie crust. Never knew this either. 20% of them have yellow 5 or 6. Here's some more, how the dyes are replaced. If you want to take out the colors and give you something more healthy, you take red 40 out and you add vegetable juice and some turmeric. Or you could take blue 1, you see in the bottom, and put in an item called spirulina extract. Dr. Mark Siegel, Fox News senior medical analyst, here to talk about this. And Doc, good morning to you. How do you see this going, first of all? And does this make us healthier?
I think it makes us healthier, Bill, if it goes in the direction of getting this stuff out of food. A lot of what you mentioned already banned in the European Union. Red dye number 3, number 40, yellow 5 and 6, blue 1 and 2. Titanium dioxide also. Petroleum-based food dyes are not healthy. And there's 2 reasons for that. One, because they can probably lead to changes in behavior in children. There's several studies preliminary studies that show they're associated with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. But maybe even worse, Bill, they're attractive. They draw you in. They look like something you might want. And when kids get addicted, and I wrote a piece about this in Stat, once they get addicted, it's hard to get them unaddicted. And what are you addicting them to? You're addicting them to things that make ultra-processed foods, that make them obese, increase depression, increase diabetes. We're not being fair to our children here. And I think that the first step is being made by Dr. Marty Makary of the FDA today. He's going to announce this afternoon which ones are. They're going to first go to the companies and say, get them out of there voluntarily. And you gave some examples what can also be used instead. Blueberries can be used too. Carrots can be used. Paprika. There's alternatives that may not look as exotic but are healthier.
Okay, so these are the FDA-banned red dye 3 foods, all right? You've got strawberry flavored milk. You've got ice pops and frozen fruit bars, maraschino cherries, some cough syrups, and some candy corn. So the reason why they banned the red dye 3 is because it gives it, you talked about this, Doc, gives the food and drinks a bright cherry red color, makes it attractive, but it can be linked to behavioral issues in some children, and it can be linked to cancer in non-human studies. You say the EU does not allow these. Why do we?
Well, that's a really good question. And I'm glad you brought up the part about red dye number 3 being linked to cancer in mice, because that's something that worries me too. Why do we? Because food companies push for it, because they know they can sell more product because of it, because they know if they add a lot of preservatives too, it stays on the shelves longer. And that's the whole thrust of the current movement against that. And I think I'm all for that. I'm all for what we're trying to do here. I mean, in Europe, if they're not there, why should we be any different? And Dr. Makary, in a statement to us, uses the point that it's preliminary studies. Fair enough, we need more study, but he also uses the word common sense. Why not go back to healthier food that we know is healthy?
Okay, Makary's the commissioner of FDA. Here's what he told you. America's kids are sick and many suffer by no fault of their own. It's not a willpower problem, end quote. How did we get this far, Doc? What do you think about all that?
Great statement, right? Not a willpower problem, no fault of their own. Young children seeing something that looks good, they're going to choose the one that looks like it's from outer space, aren't they? If you're 5 years old and it looks really bright and attractive, you're going to choose it. Then you become addicted. And I think that's what the key about no fault of their own. We got there because it sells better, because it's cheaper to make, Bill. It's not natural, but cheaper to make.
Okay, Doc, thanks for coming on. We'll see where it goes. Waiting for that announcement. Mark Siegel with us today. Thank you.
Live press conferences, executive order signings, and now you're looking live at the Health and Human Services headquarters in Washington, where HHS Secretary RFK Jr. continues his push to make America healthy again. He's expected to announce plans to phase out 8 artificial food dyes from our food supply. He'll be joined by FDA Commissioner Dr. Marty Makary. When the event starts, we're going to bring that to you live. On schedule today, they are expected to announce likely petroleum-based food dyes phased out by the FDA. The following food dyes will most likely be excised from our food diets after a proper regulatory process. Blue 1, it's used in beverages and candy and baked goods. Blue 2, used in pet foods, beverages, and candy. Green 3, used in candy and beverages. Red 40, also soda and candy. Yellow 5, yellow 6, and orange B, used to enhance the coloring and surfaces of hot dogs and sausages. All of it cosmetic, none of it nutritious. And there are links to various behavioral disorders that has led to this moment here at HHS. While we wait for this event to take place, let's bring in Max Lugavere. He's host of the Genius Life podcast, and he's understanding of what we're about to hear from Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and Dr. Marty Makary. Max, great to have you on the show. This is, for the audience's sake, expected to affect foods like the following: cereals, sports drinks, ice cream, snacks, and yogurt. What do you think about this move we're about to hear from RFK?
I think there are definitely steps in the right direction. I mean, many of these artificial food dyes are banned in Europe, or they necessitate warning labels. Here in the United States, we're serving them to our kids for breakfast. And, you know, a lot of these food colorants were approved decades ago, prior to modern research linking them to neurological dysfunction, endocrine disruption, possible risk in animals to carcinogenesis. So I think this is a strong move. You know, I think one of the areas where RFK Jr., Secretary Kennedy, has really gone hard in the paint is to basically blow open this grass loophole, which allows, most Americans don't realize this, but it allows food manufacturers basically to self-certify, to self-approve these food additives. And this is the reason why we now have thousands upon thousands of synthetic chemicals now saturating the standard American food supply. And we know that ultra-processed foods have addictive qualities. This is something that has recently come to light. Many of these ultra-processed foods tick all of the same boxes for an addictive substance that tobacco might. And this is part of the reason why we're now seeing rampant rates of chronic disease, not just in adults, right? Not just in the statistics that 1 in 2 adults essentially is trending towards not just overweight but obesity, but we're seeing this now trend in adolescent health, in the health of our children. And as you mentioned at the top, Will, you know, these chemicals are added to food not to boost their nutritional value, but to bolster the bottom line. And I think that's a huge problem.
You know, the links to children's health, this was of particular interest to me, and I think it's also what we'll hear today from RFK. He said he expects it to be wide open in our exploration of the causes, potentially environmental causes, of ADHD or autism. And for many of these food dyes, Max, there are links to behavioral issues within children. You just mentioned neurological issues and development within young kids.
Yeah, many of these synthetic food dyes, I mean, as I mentioned, they necessitate warning labels that behavior might be disrupted in a certain child when exposed to these kinds of artificial food dyes. And, you know, wealthier people can access foods that don't necessarily have these kinds of ingredients in them, foods that are more minimally processed. But, you know, it's people on the lower end of the socioeconomic spectrum who often don't have any other option. And so they're serving these to their children. That might potentially disrupt their performance in school. And it creates this vicious cycle that I think is really harmful. And, you know, I've seen a lot of pushback on social media to RFK's initiatives. And it's often that they just don't like the person. It's not necessarily that these initiatives are all that controversial. I mean, I think that this is, you know, what this promises is to bring a level of transparency to the food industry, the likes of which I haven't seen in my lifetime. So I think it's a really positive move.
You mentioned it's all about the bottom line. I mentioned that many of these food dyes are used simply for cosmetics, to make your food look more exciting, more red, more orange, more attractive to buy. These are some of the food companies that are expected to be impacted the most by doing away with these food dyes. You have General Mills, Kraft Heinz Corporation, PepsiCo, WK, Kellogg. These are some of the companies whose bottom lines might in fact be affected, Max. And for us as a consumer, what are we looking at? We're looking at the same thing that they experience in Europe, the same thing they look at in Canada, which is more nutritious food, but perhaps a little less colorful.
Yeah, well, I mean, these food manufacturers that you're listing off, I mean, they already make better, higher quality versions of the same products that are sold, you know, just north of the border, for example. I mean, in for example, Fruit Loops in Canada. I mean, this made headlines. I was lucky enough to speak on the roundtable panel discussion on nutrition in America that was held by Senator Ron Johnson a couple months ago. And, you know, we had a viral moment when one of my panelist members held up 2 bags of identical cereal, one produced here in the United States or for sale here in the United States and the other sold in Canada. And they look more or less the same. It's just that one version is colored by, you know, with blueberry extract and annatto coloring and turmeric and stuff like that. Whereas here we get the cheaper synthetic versions. And these chemicals do make these products more attractive to children. I mean, we already know that these types of ultra-processed foods, they're hyper-palatable, they're highly calorie-dense, they tend to be nutrient impoverished, which is why, you know, oftentimes you'll see synthetic vitamins and minerals added after the fact. But these colorants, what they do is they create this phenomena of hyperpalatability, this idea that they become more attractive, and so we're more inclined to eat more of them. And this is why, I mean, really groundbreaking research out of the NIH has found that, you know, when all you're given are ultra-processed foods to consume to satiety, meaning to fullness, I mean, you end up overshooting your daily calorie needs for the day by about 500 additional calories. So that right there is foundational to the obesity crisis that we're seeing in adults, and certainly now growing in children as well.
All right, Max Lugavere, thanks so much for being with us today. HHS Secretary RFK Jr. is speaking now on his plan to eliminate artificial food dye from the American food supply. He's joined by Marty Makary and Jay Bhattacharya. Let's listen in.
And it was going to steal from us and erode all of our leadership, our moral authority, and our values, and our role as an exemplary nation. And since his death, we've had this extraordinary chronic disease epidemic. When my uncle was president, 3% of American kids had chronic disease. Today, it's around 60%. And these are a broad category, the ones that Marty mentioned, like ADHD, the neurological disorders, ADD, ADHD, speech delay, language delay, tics, Tourette syndrome, narcolepsy, ASD, and autism. All of these are injuries that I never heard of when I was a kid. They were not part of the nomenclature. They weren't part of the dialogue. There was zero spent in this country treating chronic disease when my uncle was president. Today, it's about $1.8 trillion annually. It's bankrupting our nation. 74% of American kids cannot qualify for military service. Oh, how are we going to maintain our global leadership with such a sick population? We have all these autoimmune diseases, these exotic diseases, and again, I never heard of juvenile diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, Crohn's disease, and 100 others that were just unknown when I was a kid. I never knew anybody with a peanut allergy. I never knew anybody with a food allergy. Why do 5 of my 7 kids have allergies? I never knew of anybody who had eczema. I knew of a very small number of children who had asthma, but that has exploded as well today. And our fertility is dropping dramatically. teenagers in this country today have the same testosterone levels as 68-year-old men. Our girls are reaching puberty 6 years early, from 10 to 14 years old. And this is existential for our country. And we have to address it. And one of the problems, when I met with, and I want to commend the food companies for working with us to achieve this agreement or this settlement. And when I went in a few months or about a month ago to meet with a few food companies, I was talking with my staff about these petroleum-based dyes, and I said if they want to add petroleum, if they want to eat petroleum, they ought to add it themselves at home. But they shouldn't be feeding it to the rest of us. And without our knowledge or consent. And unfortunately, we're going to get rid of the dyes, and then one by one, we're going to get rid of every ingredient and additive in food that we can legally address. One of the problems is that the industry, which all of these industries, cast a dark shadow historically over this agency. And there's so many conflicts that we are now systematically eliminating. That has allowed them to suppress the science. There's shockingly few studies, even on food dyes, and on all these other ingredients as well. And Jay Bhattacharya, who is here and who's running the director of NIH, is now narrowly targeting these kind of food additives for scientific study, so that one by one we can start eliminating them where they can. Where we can't, there's things that we'll never be able to eliminate, like sugar. And sugar is poison, and Americans need to know that. It is poisoning us. It's giving us a diabetes crisis. When I was a kid, I always say this, a typical pediatrician would see one case of diabetes in his lifetime. Today, it's 1 out of every 3 kids who walks through his office door. In our most recent study from NIH, 38% of American teens, it's half our adult population. This is existential. We are spending as much on mitochondrial disorders like diabetes as we spend on our military budget. We can't continue to exist like this. And the problem is industry is making money on keeping us sick. As Jay pointed out, ADHD is associated with all these behavioral disorders. But those disorders are treated not by changing our diet, but providing medications to treat our kids. And they get medicated, and that's the only solution. And, I would point out that there is part of the etiology of these diseases is a kind of media malpractice, a mass psychosis that has our media not talking about this. And one of the possible reasons for that is the amount of money that's coming from the pharmaceutical companies into our media and from these food companies, or the advertising. And the advertising has at least plays a factor. So that revenue, that extraordinary revenue stream, in disabling their capacity or their inclination for skepticism and for critical thinking. So Americans don't know what they're eating, and they don't know the implications of those things. And for those products, Mark Hyman says in his book, the 10-day sugar detox diet, which I'll give a plug to, is a very good book. He talks about how dangerous sugar is and how it's as addictive as crack. And our children are addicted to it from when they're little kids. Our agency recommends, I think, a huge amount of sugar for kids from when they're born. And it's hurting them, and it's addicting them, and it's changing their taste buds so that they crave it. And it's disabling our population. So for those ingredients that we can't ban legally, we're going to start informing Americans about what they're eating. And we're going to try to work with Congress and the White House to make sure that we have adequate labeling so mothers who go into the grocery stores know what is good for their children and what is not. I want to say one other thing about the moms. When I went and spoke for the first time, and I met with the heads of all the food industry companies, one of the things that they said to us is that the worst thing for us is if we have a patchwork of legislation in all these different states, because then we're not capable of marketing nationally distributed products, because we're going to have different regulations in every state. And they didn't want that, and that's one of the reasons they came to the table with us. I want to thank Speaker Schultz, and I want to thank Governor Morrissey, and I visited many other governors in Virginia and West Virginia, in Arizona and Utah and other states that are banned, that are having these local bans. But those bans have given us leverage to make demands in the food company, and the only reason that those states have banned these products is because of these ladies and millions of more across the country, the warrior moms who have powered the MAHA movement. And I just want to urge all of you, it's not the time to stop. It's the time to redouble your efforts, because we have them on the run now. And we are going to win this battle. And 4 years from now, we're going to have most of these products off the market, or you will know about them when you go in the grocery store. So I want to thank you. And finally, and most importantly, I want to thank President Trump. President Trump often, says that he's going to make America great again. But he knows that he cannot make our country great again if our country is weak, if we're not healthy, if we don't have vigor, if we're not a robust people. He says that he's going to restore the American dream. And a healthy person has 1,000 dreams. The sick person only has one. And right now, there's 60% of the people in this country who have only one dream, that they can make it through a day without pain, with energy, without having to take medications. And we are going to change that for our country. And I want to thank the moms and thank President Trump for his confidence in my leadership and for allowing me to surround myself with such an extraordinary team of scientists who are going to restore transparency to this agency, who are going to do replicated science, we're going to restore gold standard science so we know what's in our food and we can eliminate it. Thank you all very much.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.